Admittedly, it's hard to be happy, especially when everything sucks. But sometimes, we look to fiction for inspiration, especially when real life is beating us to the ground. And that's what the Desperate Optimist embodies. That final thread of sanity and beatdown that everything's going to be okay. But not too idealistic that we still feel connected to how that character struggles, gets angry, or even gets upset, but rises up. So welcome to the Dissecting the Archetype Series, where I break down popular character tropes and dissect how they work and how they don't work. And today, instead of pulling together a lot of characters and finding their common grounds, I want to look at this from the perspective of one character and textually see how they make up this archetype work in the context of their story. And for this one, we have the Desperate Optimist, known as Charlie Morningstar of Hazbin Hotel, the princess of hell who has to deal with the rampant genocide of her people. So before we begin, what is the Desperate Optimist? Sure, it's easy to make characters who are idealists in a story that's about positive change and has a safety net that everyone around you will assure you that it's going to be okay. But the Desperate Optimist challenges that telling by stacking all of the odds against the character's favor. You show them panic, cry, or even challenge their own ideologies, because it's not easy keeping a smile when you're falling apart. But in the end, they negotiate their good-hearted nature with the need to reinforce stricter methods. The adversaries that the Desperate Optimists have to conquer vary, of course, depending on the story, what their problems are, who they're with, what kind of person they really are, and what kind of changes happen in the story. But today, I'm going to focus on Charlie as my case study because I think she's a great outlier in a den of sinners. So, who is Charlie Morningstar? Charlie Morningstar is the princess of hell who has to deal with a problem in her kingdom, namely that angels from heaven come down every year to kill her people to quote-unquote solve overpopulation. Empathetic to the people that have to die during the extermination, she creates a potential solution through a hotel that redeems sinners and potentially sends them to heaven. Unfortunately, due to the nature of heaven's strange bureaucracies and her own people's attitudes towards redemption, this plan doesn't exactly work out. And she is running out of time because her people are getting murdered. So, let's talk about her character development. Unlike the other characters, Charlie's character development is much subtler, but that's mostly because she begins as a pretty complete character already with positive traits. Oftentimes, we think of character development as a flawed character overcoming problems and adversaries, then becoming a better person. But that's not always the case. Character development doesn't always mean the bettering of a personality, but just the renegotiation of how you act and see the world as you gain more experience. Charlie's development seems shallow on the surface because we associate happiness and positivity as the supposed product of character development. But actually, she still has a long way to go. And as a desperate optimist, she eventually learns the difficulties in keeping a smile despite everything. In the beginning of the series, Charlie is relatively unaware of how hell actually works societally as a princess. Her street smarts are almost nothing compared to the sinners she's around, and she has a somewhat savior complex mixed in with blind chosen optimism because of her position. We see that though her motivations and goals are to protect her people don't automatically view her with respect befitting of a princess. So on an authoritative level, she has none. She's not as charismatic or well-adjusted socially as the overlords and doesn't have that strong of an influence on the people yet to make a direct order. She also has difficulty in communication with others despite talking a lot. It's not to say that she is incapable or malicious, it's just that she herself isn't as used to connecting with sinners yet and will need time to learn that being happy isn't always the solution. This is also partially because she's never been to Earth or never actually had a mortal life. It's not that easy for her to understand the intricacies of social life without actually living through the hardship faced and caused by these sinners when they were still mortal. But despite her shortcomings and naivetés, she has genuine passion for her project and cares deeply for the people around her despite her difficulty in understanding them. So by the end of season 1, she realizes the deeper politics between hell and heaven and how she needs to see the difference between peace and passivity. Despite her pacifist nature, she therefore leads an army of questionable cannibal soldiers to fight against the tyranny of heaven, and truly challenges her good-hearted nature by finally standing up for her people. Charlie has a very interesting personality. Her entire theme is promoting redemption, and that no matter how much evil you did, there is always a second chance as long as you look for it, which requires her to always see the good in others. She believes in mercy more than anyone else and forgives even those that she finds as vile. But dissecting this further, I want to understand her role as a main character. Sure, we see a lot of her and she's part of the main cast, but she actually shares the spotlight often with other characters, sometimes not even getting the main moment. Instead, Charlie acts as a support main character, where she's the catalyst that inspires other characters to develop. She guides other characters to realizing their true potential and to develop their stories further. She is usually an accessory for characters to realize their mistakes or to better themselves in the future, or to even progress their own stories, which isn't a bad thing. She's still the focal point of the series, the songs, and the story, but her personality is meant to hold the hands of others in discovering self-actualization or even grander powers. She's an enabler in a good way, which is necessary for a show like this where growth and redemption of other characters is quintessential. So let's begin with how Charlie works for the plot. Charlie isn't the main focus because she's not yet her individual character, but instead connected to her agenda. However, she slowly develops into a more suitable leader for a harsh reality and stops seeing the world through rose-tinted glasses. It works because we have to understand the priority of development when it comes to Hazbin's themes, namely redemption. Charlie herself doesn't need to be redeemed in a traditional sense. She's noble and selfless, but also prideful, dense, ignorant, and sometimes slightly delusional with her ideologies. This is in contrast to the people she's supposed to save, the sinners. These are the people that need the spotlight put on them because they're the ones that need to grow more to make the themes of redemption work. If Charlie develops but the sinners don't, then the story could fall off. Because if you rush redemption, it's gonna feel like a cop-out, or we could miss interesting nuances that come from sinning in the first place. Now, is that to say that Charlie has no character development? No. So let's move on to how she embodies the Desperate Optimist. Number 1 is compromising your ideals. When a desperate optimist wants to do good by their own morally just means, that doesn't mean that the world is willing to accommodate. Charlie's wants for peace and happiness is immediately tested by the bureaucracies and problems of heaven, especially with Adam, the head angel that's currently leading the extermination, and his own personal power tripping and ego. This is emphasized with the fact that her own people don't exactly believe in this endeavor, and we see her panicking that the hotel plan wasn't working despite her efforts. Throughout the first season, we see that she loses that idealistic optimism of thinking that war shouldn't be fought with war. Instead, she stands up in the front lines and even becomes a powerful unit on the field. Though, considering this is one of the rarest times she actually fights, she is easily outmatched by a more experienced Adam. Nevertheless, the importance of this moment is that it shows Charlie isn't a pushover when it comes to actually getting what she wants, especially if it's something that's very important to her. Just because she's nice doesn't mean that she'll let other people walk over her, meaning that the desperate optimist usually has to compromise their ideals and maybe even do something that they slightly regret, something that's even antithetical to their original ideologies in the first place, because they have to operate not just by their own morals, but also by the context of their world. Which means that this archetype needs to be crafty and also very, very determined. Number 2, know your priority and who your priorities are. The desperate optimist has limits to how quote-unquote positive they can be, and that includes negotiating their relationships with other characters around them who may or may not see the world in the same perspective. It's always nice to show how the desperate optimist first and foremost negotiates their relationships with people versus their ideology of the greater good. So what happens when you have to deal with people that are cynical? What happens if you try to deal with people that are openly assholes, people who are sketchy, people who are crazy, people that don't even believe in you? So you need to understand if your integrity is going to actually get you results, and even to let you get more people to join your cause. Furthermore, there's an additional layer of responsibility that you have to your friends. Some idealistic characters believe that they can and should save everyone, but a desperate optimist knows that even if they want to help everyone, you need to prioritize those closest to you. And this also includes what happens when they're put in peril. Charlie herself loses 2 dragons and a friend, Razzle, Dazzle, and Serpentius during the war, and has to come to terms that she will be making more sacrifices in the future. While this dilemma was solved with a simple song, sure, I still think it was a good lesson to teach Charlie, which brings me to the point that desperate optimists usually have to tackle the reality that they have people around them that can either help or hinder their goals. And it's also important to convince them that not everything is going to shit, even if it is. Number 3 is showing cracks in their armor. Emphasizing the desperate in this archetype also includes showing clear signs of weakness and limitations due to their personality. Remember, just because they're a good person doesn't mean they have to be liked, and Charlie portrays this very well. She wrongfully associates authority with being mean, but learns that authority is a tool that she needs to know how to use in the future. She needs to know how to put her foot down without being cruel. She's also seen to be at her wit's end, with several people constantly trying to manipulate her, and her boundaries for trust are surprisingly higher. We also show that she becomes more extreme with her scope of thinking the more she gets desperate. She begins from promoting the redemption idea to her people and trying to keep a cordial relationship with others, only for it to horribly backfire, until she realizes that the only way to truly fight politics is by talking to the politicians. So she finds a way to talk to the people at the top. It's important when writing characters like this to show cracks in their resolve and moments where they actually begin to shift their way of thinking. Also, it's good to make them question their optimism and want to see the good in other people. This could be through naivete or their inability to operate under stressful situations where smiling and being happy can't fix everything. In Charlie's case, this is in her naive thinking that trustful exercises or happy talking hours would always be able to solve other people's problems. This is best shown through Angel Dust's situation, where Charlie thought she could just barge in and make the situation better. But that's not true. Sometimes the desperate optimist's limits to optimism have to be challenged by the narrative and other characters for the betterment of themselves and for them to reassess their priorities. But this doesn't mean that Charlie isn't flawed. Just because she conceptually works doesn't mean her execution is perfect. Heck, a lot of people have criticized that Charlie's demeanor as being much blander than the development of the other characters, or they didn't vibe with her development compared to more grounded storylines. While we can't usually relate to people in power trying to adjust themselves to save an entire country, we can relate to people whose lives are literally falling apart, but try to keep themselves together with defensive attitudes. That's potentially why some people have difficulty with relating with her as a protagonist. Charlie also really doesn't have time to grow. The problem is that her archetype requires her to juggle screen time to flesh out her narrative layers, to see her struggle meaningfully, and to see her adjust and succeed properly. But because of the massive cast, a larger-than-life narrative, and so little episodes to play with, Charlie's meaningful problems are usually rushed or concluded within the episodes. Another is that her goals are too massive of a part for her character that's all she usually is. It's like being known as the smart kid while only having the personality trait of being smart. Charlie's development revolves around her growing desperation for her plan to work and the ticking time bomb that Adam and the Exorcist gave, meaning she needs to work under the social pressure of both being a princess and a pioneer of the redemption plan, because she will literally witness a genocide if that doesn't happen. But Charlie's inner insecurities, while hinted and shown at times, are sometimes hand-waved by the story because she's not given the proper spotlight. One of the best examples of this, in my opinion, where the story needed to compress Charlie's development, is when she had to convince the cannibals of Cannibal Town to fight for themselves. If you really dissect how the cannibals were convinced, it was because of Charlie's singing, but not necessarily through her message. And it was Alistair's ability to target what they actually wanted, which was free food and to feast on the angels. This is one of the subtler ways the show makes you realize that Charlie's agency as a character hasn't fully been realized yet. When she tries to have a hand at the wheel, she's a byproduct of the show's other supporting cast to help her, which means that she is slightly codependent on the other characters. Hence the slight desperation. Lucifer was the one that helped her with Adam and the Heaven meetings, Alistair brought her to Rosie helped her reconcile her relationship with Vaggie, and so many other characters playing integral roles to Charlie's progress, proving that Charlie's characterization isn't yet complete. So I'm interested to see how the story is going to cook her in the future, where she needs to stand on her own 2 feet. Overall, the Desperate Optimist and Charlie Morningstar as a character in general is a perfect archetype for those that like seeing the hard part art of always being happy. And that's why I personally really like Charlie's character. I know that a lot of people think she's kind of basic, but for me, she's a light in the end of a tunnel, of a very, very long tunnel, and she's someone that I definitely appreciate in the future. Anyway, my name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me. Bye-bye!